My dear friend, there's a story I need to share with you. One that's been weighing on my heart since I witnessed it unfold in our little Iowa town. You might recognize yourself in Robert Mitchell. Lord knows, I did. So many of us came home from that war carrying more than our duffel bags. We carried things nobody could see, things we never spoke about, not even to our wives. This happened at young Emma's wedding last summer, a day that should have been nothing but joy and dancing. But sometimes the good Lord has different plans. Sometimes He needs us broken all the way open before He can start putting us back together. What happened to Robert that day? Well, it reminded all of us that the wounds we can't see are often the ones that need healing most. The Riverside Country Club hadn't changed much since 1962 when it opened. Same burgundy carpet in the ballroom, same crystal chandeliers that caught the light just so. Robert Mitchell stood in the men's room, gripping the pink marble sink hard enough to make his wedding ring click against the porcelain. That grinding ache in his right leg, the one he'd been living with since Nixon was president, felt like somebody was working a hot screwdriver through his thigh bone. The band was playing The Way You Look Tonight in that smooth Glenn Miller style. Same arrangement from his wedding to Margaret in '73. He could smell her white shoulders' perfume even now, 4 years after cancer took her. Robert reached for the stack of white hand towels, the thick kind they only put out for weddings. Folded it twice, bit down hard. The wave of pain rolled up from his knee like thunder after lightning. His Timex watch read 8:47. Emma's father-daughter dance was at 9 o'clock sharp. He splashed cold water on his face, straightened the silver tie Emma had picked to match her bridesmaids' dresses. His reflection in the spotted mirror looked every one of his 68 years. Maybe more. The walk back to the ballroom took everything he had. Each step measured, weight careful on the left side. He'd learned that shuffle over the decades, make it look like a tough man's swagger instead of an injured man's limp. Emma stood by the dance floor in Margaret's wedding dress, the one with the Belgian lace sleeves her grandmother had sewn by hand. The dress had been taken in at the waist and hem, but those sleeves remained untouched, delicate as spider silk. "Grandpa, there you are!" Emma's voice carried her grandmother's warmth. Her new husband Jake stood beside her in his army dress blues, fresh from his second tour in Afghanistan. Boy, had that same 1,000-yard stare Robert recognized from his own mirror. "Just needed a moment, sweetheart." The band leader, an older fellow with pomade-slick hair, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the father-daughter dance." Emma took Robert's arm. He felt her notice how he favored his right side, but she had Margaret's grace about such things. Knew when to let a man keep his dignity. They moved onto the parquet floor, the same floor where he and Margaret had danced at the Elks Club mixers back in the day. His left hand found Emma's waist. His right took her small hand in his. The music swelled. Tommy Dorsey's arrangement, smooth as aged bourbon. 1 step, 2 step, turn. The pain shot up like somebody driving a railroad spike through bone. 3 step, 4 step, turn. Something deep in his thigh shifted. Not the usual ache, but something moving, grinding against itself like millstones. "You all right, Grandpa?" "Never better, sweet." His knee buckled completely. Not a stumble, but a full collapse, like somebody had pulled his bones out from under him. Robert tried to twist away from Emma, spare her the fall, but momentum won. He went down hard, his shoulder catching the gift table. Wedding china, Emma's pattern, same as Margaret's, shattered across the floor in a cascade of white porcelain and crystal. The music scratched to a stop, that awful silence that follows breaking glass. Emma dropped to her knees beside him, her dress pooling around her like spilled cream. "Grandpa!" The pain was different now. Not the familiar companion he'd carried since '71, but something immediate and wrong. His leg had twisted at an angle that made his stomach roll. When he tried to straighten it, white spots burst across his vision like flashbulbs. Jake pushed through the gathering crowd, his medic training kicking in automatic. "Everyone step back, give him room to breathe." The boy's hands were steady as he knelt beside Robert, fingers already finding the pulse point at the ankle. His face went pale as milk. "Mr. Mitchell." Robert's son James materialized from the crowd, still holding his whiskey neat in a crystal tumbler. Susan and David weren't 2 steps behind. His 3 children gathered around him on that country club floor while 200 wedding guests stared. "Dad, what's wrong?" Susan knelt beside Emma, using that calm teacher voice she'd perfected over 20 years. Robert couldn't answer. The pain had moved beyond his leg now, spreading through him like ink in water. He thought of Tommy Kowalski for the first time in months, heard his young voice on that December night in the jungle. "Bobby, something's wrong. Something's real wrong." The ambulance siren grew closer, that lonely wail cutting through the Iowa evening. Robert closed his eyes, knowing that the secret he'd carried longer than his children had been alive was about to come into the light. All these years of perfect control, undone in a single moment on a dance floor. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, Robert caught sight of the reception hall, the Swedish meatballs growing cold on the buffet, the wedding cake uncut, guests murmuring in worried clusters. The dance floor empty except for scattered rose petals from Emma's bouquet. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The emergency room ceiling had water stains shaped like artillery bursts. Or maybe that was just Robert seeing patterns where none existed. The nurse's scissors whispered through his dress pants, the good wool ones Margaret had bought him for their 40th anniversary. Cool air hit his skin as the fabric parted. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to rate your pain from 1 to 10, the nurse said. Her name tag read Martinez, and she had that same no-nonsense look his daughter Susan got when grading papers. 3. The lie came automatic as breathing. His exposed leg told its own truth. Purple-black from knee to ankle, the skin stretched tight and shiny like an overripe plum. Martinez's fingers hovered above the swelling without touching. "How long has it looked like this?" "Just from the fall to night." She wrote something on her clipboard. Robert caught the word chronic before she turned away. The curtain rattled on its rings. James burst through, still in his courtroom suit, cell phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, Judge Henderson, I understand. Family emergency. The Morrison deposition will have to—" He stopped mid-sentence, staring at Robert's leg. The phone slowly lowered from his ear. "Good Lord, Dad. Don't take the— How long?" James used his cross-examination voice now. "How long has your leg been like that?" The X-ray technician wheeled in the portable machine before Robert could answer. Young fellow, maybe David's age, with Marcus on his name tag. "Need to get some images, Mr. Mitchell. Can you straighten your leg?" Robert tried. Deep in his thigh, metal scraped against bone, a sound he felt more than heard, like fingernails on slate. His hands found the bed rails, gripped until his knuckles went white. "That's good enough," Marcus said quickly. "Just hold still." The machine hummed. James paced the 3 steps the curtained cubicle allowed, back and forth, back and forth. Same way Robert used to pace the hardware store at 4 in the morning when the pain wouldn't let him sleep. Dr. Catherine Brooks pushed through the curtain, tablet in hand. Young enough to be Susan's daughter, with that same gentle way of moving. She stopped at the X-ray screen mounted on the wall. Her hand went to her mouth. "Mr. Mitchell." Her voice had that forced calm doctors use when they're trying not to alarm you. "When were you injured?" "I wasn't shot, if that's what you're thinking." She turned the screen toward him. There it was, clear as daylight, a jagged piece of metal 3 inches long, pressed right up against the white line of his femoral artery. The surgical consent form trembled in Robert's hands. The morphine they'd pushed made the words swim like minnows in muddy water. But one line stayed sharp. Risk of death. "Mr. Mitchell, we need your signature." Dr. Brooks pulled a chair close to his bed, the metal legs scraping linoleum. "This fragment has been in your leg for— how long exactly?" "December 3rd, 1971. The words came out flat, automatic. "Oh, 300 hours. Firebase Alpha." The room went quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Robert felt his children lean in closer, their shadows falling across the bed. "Dad." James had his phone out, fingers poised over the screen like he was taking a deposition. "That's 48 years. You've had shrapnel in your leg for 48 years. The curtain rings rattled again. Susan and David pushed through, both still in their wedding clothes. David's bow tie hung loose around his neck like a surrender flag. "The fragment," Dr. Brooks continued, turning her tablet so they could all see, "has shifted. Maybe from tonight's fall, maybe gradually over time. It's pressing against your femoral artery here." Her finger traced the image. "The vessel wall is paper thin. You have about 10% blood flow to your lower leg." "So we schedule surgery," Susan said in her problem-solving voice. "When? Tomorrow?" "Tonight." Dr. Brooks set down the tablet. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to be direct. This fragment could puncture through the artery at any moment. If that happens—" She didn't finish, didn't need to. Robert knew what arterial bleeding looked like. He'd held pressure on Tommy Kowalski's femoral for 23 minutes while they waited for dust-off. 23 minutes of blood pulsing between his fingers. Tommy asking about his sister Dorothy, about Chicago pizza, about anything except why the coordinates had been wrong. "No." Robert pushed himself up on his elbows, ignoring the pull of the IV. "I'm going home." "Dad, you can't." "I said no." He swung his legs toward the edge of the bed. The room tilted, righted itself. James stepped forward, blocking his path. "If you try to leave, I'll call Judge Henderson. We can have an emergency competency hearing within the hour." "You'd declare your own father incompetent?" "If it saves your life? Yes." They stared at each other, father and son, both stubborn as Missouri mules. The heart monitor picked up speed, beeping faster. "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Brooks's voice stayed gentle. "There's something else. The tissue around the fragment shows signs of chronic infection. Old infection, probably decades. Your kidney function is compromised. This has been slowly poisoning your body for years." David's fist connected with the wall. The drywall cracked, left a depression the size of a baseball. 48 years, Dad? Mom died thinking you didn't care enough to come into the hospital with her, and you were carrying this? David. Susan's hand on his arm, but her eyes stayed on Robert. Dad, why? Why didn't you have it removed? Robert looked at his children. Behind them, through a gap in the curtain, he could see Emma in the hallway. She'd changed out of Margaret's wedding dress into jeans and one of Jake's army t-shirts. Her face was puffy from crying. The memories pushed up like shrapnel working its way to the surface. Firebase Alpha. The rain that wouldn't stop. The coordinates he'd called in. The white phosphorus rounds falling on their own position. Tommy's screaming. There's a chaplain on call, Dr. Brooks said quietly. Father Murphy. He's a Vietnam veteran too. Lost his arm at Khe Sanh. Would you like me to call him? Robert's hand went to his right thigh, pressed against the spot where the metal lived. Under his palm, through the hospital gown, he felt it shift. Actually felt it move, grinding against tissue. Dad? Susan's voice, scared now. The blood in his leg felt wrong, thick and slow like motor oil in January. His foot had gone from cold to numb. When he tried to wiggle his toes, nothing happened. Get the chaplain, Robert said, and call the hardware store. Tell Pete he'll need to open tomorrow. Tell him... He stopped, swallowed hard. Tell him the combination to the safe is Margaret's birthday. James already had his phone out, but his eyes stayed on his father. Dad, what really happened at Firebase Alpha? Robert looked at his son, this successful lawyer who'd never known a day of war, never held a dying friend, never called in coordinates that killed your own men. How could he explain? How could any of them understand? I made a mistake, Robert said, and Tommy Kowalski paid for it. The monitor's beeping grew irregular. Dr. Brooks checked the screen, her face tightening. "We need to move now. The fragment shifted another 2 millimeters while we've been talking." She turned to the family. "I'm calling the surgical team. We have maybe an hour before—" "Before what?" Emma had entered the room, Jake behind her. Dr. Brooks looked at Robert, then back at Emma. "Before your grandfather's luck runs out." Robert felt the metal inside him like a living thing now, working its way toward the artery with every heartbeat. 48 years of carrying death in his leg, and now it wanted its due. "There's something else," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "In my garage, behind the workbench. There's a Maxwell House coffee can. Inside are letters. Every December 3rd since '71. He looked at Emma. "They're for Tommy's sister, Dorothy Kowalski, Chicago. Make sure she gets them when, James corrected, when you get out of surgery." But Robert had seen enough death to know the difference between when and if. The fragment shifted again, and this time everyone saw him flinch. "Call the chaplain," he said again. "I need to make a confession." Father Patrick Murphy stood in the doorway like a man who'd learned to take up less space. His left sleeve hung different from his right, and when he extended his hand to shake, Robert saw the prosthetic fingers, the expensive kind the VA had started providing in the '80s. "Mr. Mitchell," the priest's voice carried traces of South Boston. "I'm Father Murphy. Your daughter asked me to come." "You were at Quezon," Robert said. It wasn't a question. Something about the way Murphy held himself, the way his eyes tracked exits. 68. Murphy pulled up a chair with his good hand. "Lost this trying to pull a Marine out of a burning track. He didn't make it." He said it simple, like stating the weather. The room had filled up now. James stood by the window, phone in hand. Susan sat on the small sofa, David beside her. Emma and Jake near the door, her hand gripping his. "They said you want to make a confession," Father Murphy said. "Not the kind you're thinking." Robert shifted in the bed, felt the fragment grinding. "My children need to know what happened." Dr. Brooks appeared at the curtain. "Mr. Mitchell, the OR will be ready in 20 minutes. We need to—" "They need to know." She nodded, stepped back but didn't leave. Another witness to what was coming. Robert's throat felt full of sand. The morphine made everything feel distant, underwater, but the memory came clear as morning. Firebase Alpha, December 3rd, '71. Monsoon season. Rain so hard you couldn't see 10 feet. His children leaned in. Even David uncrossed his arms, listening. "We were taking mortar fire, had been for 3 days. Command wanted us to call in artillery on the enemy position." Robert's hand went to his leg, pressed against the fragment. "I was squad leader." The spotter, Thompson, had the coordinates. 773-941. The numbers still came automatic after 48 years. But I'd been up for 72 hours straight. The numbers. Robert swallowed, tasted bile. I thought Thompson was wrong, overruled him. Called in 773-914. The monitors beeped into the silence. 3 minutes later, our own artillery hit us. White phosphorus rounds. 9 of them. Susan covered her mouth. James set down his phone. "White phosphorus burns at 5,000 degrees, Robert continued, his voice flat as old paint. "It doesn't stop burning until there's nothing left to burn. Water doesn't put it out. Dirt doesn't put it out. It just burns." "Dear God," Susan whispered. "Tommy Kowalski was 10 feet from me when the first round hit. He was 19 years old. Polish kid from Chicago. His sister, Dorothy, had sent him kielbasa in his last care package. He'd shared it with the whole squad." Robert closed his eyes, but that just made it clearer. Tommy's screaming, the smell of burning flesh. The way white phosphorus lit up the rain like falling stars. The phosphorus got him, but it was shrapnel that killed him. Piece of our own ordnance nicked his femoral artery. Robert's hand pressed harder against his own fragment. "I held pressure on it for 23 minutes while we waited for dust-off. He kept asking about his sister, about the restaurant he was going to open, about everything except why our own artillery was falling on us. "It was friendly fire," James said slowly. "You called in the wrong coordinates and I killed him." The words came out raw. "I killed Tommy Kowalski." David stood up, paced to the wall with the hole he'd punched. "So you kept the shrapnel. As what? Punishment?" "As reminder." "A reminder?" David's voice rose. "Mom died alone because you couldn't walk into a hospital. You missed my kids' births. Susan's wedding ceremony. You stood in the parking lot." "David," Father Murphy said gently. "No!" David turned on the priest. 48 years. He chose his guilt over us." "The Army," James said suddenly. "Did they investigate?" Robert nodded. "Said it was equipment failure. Radio malfunction due to weather. Nobody's fault." "They covered it up." James's lawyer mind was working now. "They covered up friendly fire. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison made that call, said the truth wouldn't help anybody. Not the families, not the Army, not even the dead." Father Murphy's good hand found his rosary. "Mr. Mitchell, carrying this guilt. Tommy trusted me." Robert's voice cracked like old leather. "I was supposed to keep them safe. That was my job. Keep my boys safe." The surgical team appeared at the door. Dr. Harrison, the vascular surgeon, Vietnamese features softened with age. He wore a small pin on his lapel. 3rd Marine Division. "We need to take him now. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. If it does, tell Dorothy Kowalski that her brother was the bravest man I ever knew." They pushed through the double doors into the surgical wing. The lights overhead flashed by like tracer rounds. Robert felt the fragment shift again, metal against artery wall, death kissing death. The anesthesia mask descended. Dr. Harrison's voice came from far away. "Count backward from 10. 10, 9, 8. Tommy stood at the foot of the operating table. 19 forever, that Chicago grin intact. 7, 6. "Hey, Bobby," Tommy said. "We need to talk about what really happened with those coordinates." 5, 4. "Morrison lied to you," Tommy said, his voice fading as the anesthesia took hold. "The coordinates you called were right. The recovery room smelled like betadine and floor wax, same as every hospital Robert had avoided for 48 years. His eyelids felt weighted with sand. The breathing tube was gone, but his throat burned raw from where it had been. "Grandpa?" Emma's voice. He forced his eyes open. She sat in the visitor's chair, still wearing Jake's Army t-shirt from the night before. Or was it 2 nights? The wall clock read 2:30, but morning or afternoon he couldn't tell. "Surgery went well." Emma squeezed his hand, careful of the IV line. "Dr. Harrison got the fragment out. 7 hours on the table, but you're okay." Robert's hand moved to his thigh. Thick gauze and tape from hip to knee. The deep, grinding ache he'd lived with since Nixon was president. Gone. Different pain now, surgical and clean, but that constant pressure had vanished like morning fog. "How long?" His voice came out like gravel. 3 days. You've been in and out." Emma reached for something on the bedside table. A leather journal, brown with age, pages swollen from years of humidity. "Grandpa, I found this in your desk drawer when I went for your things." Robert recognized it immediately, his December 3rd journal. "I read some of it." Emma's eyes filled. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have, but—" "S-okay." The words scraped his throat. She opened the journal, pages crackling. Every year, the same entry. "Dear Tommy, I'm sorry." Then pages about him. What he liked to eat, ham and lima beans, which everyone else hated. How he sang Sinatra off-key in the shower tent. How he sent half his pay to his sister Dorothy. Emma pulled out her phone, one of those new smart ones that did everything but make coffee. "I looked her up on that Facebook thing everyone uses now. Dorothy Kowalski. She lives in Chicago still. Taught high school English for 30 years. Robert's chest tightened. The heart monitor responded with faster beeping. "Grandpa, she wants to talk to you. She's been waiting 48 years for someone to tell her about Tommy's last days." The door opened. Dr. Harrison entered, chart in hand. Behind him, James with his briefcase, Susan carrying a duffel bag full of Robert's clothes, David with his hands shoved in his pockets, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Mr. Mitchell." Harrison pulled up a rolling stool. The wheels squeaked like they needed oil. "The surgery was more complicated than we expected. The fragment had been there so long, tissue had grown around it. But that's not our main concern." Robert watched his children arrange themselves around the bed. James already had his legal pad out. Susan unpacked a clean shirt, his comfortable khakis. David stood by the window looking at the parking lot. "The infection," Harrison continued, "was extensive. Your kidney function is down to 30%. The years of chronic infection have done damage. You'll need dialysis, 3 times a week to start." "For how long?" James asked, pen poised. "For life, unless we can find a kidney match for transplant." The room went quiet. Robert could hear the IV drip, steady as a leaky faucet. "There's something else," Harrison said. "I served in Vietnam, 3rd Marines, 68 to 70. I know about Firebase Alpha." Robert's whole body tensed. "Everyone in I Corps heard about it. 9 Willie Pete rounds on our own position. But Mr. Mitchell..." Harrison set down the chart. "The investigation report was wrong. I know because I treated one of the survivors at the field hospital. Specialist Thompson. Robert's spotter, the one who'd had the right coordinates. Thompson kept saying the same thing in triage," Harrison continued. "Said his squad leader called in the right grid. Said someone down the line must have switched the numbers." The room tilted. Robert gripped the bed rails. "That's not possible," Robert said. "I called it wrong. I remember." "You remember what they told you to remember." Harrison pulled out his phone, scrolled through something. 3 months ago, there was a VA reunion in Des Moines. I met someone there. Carl Morrison, Senator Morrison's son. Senator Morrison, California, Armed Services Committee. "He's dying," Harrison said. "Pancreatic cancer. Wanted to clear his conscience. His father was Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, your battalion commander at Firebase Alpha." James moved closer. Susan set down the clothes. Even David turned from the window. "Carl Morrison was the radio operator that night," Harrison said. "Specialist Morrison. He was 19, exhausted, been up 4 days straight. When you called in the coordinates, he wrote them down wrong, transposed the numbers." The monitor's beeping filled the silence. "His uncle covered it up," Harrison continued. "Changed the investigation to show equipment failure instead of human error. Didn't want his nephew living with that guilt." "No." Robert pushed himself up, ignoring the pull of sutures. "I remember calling it wrong. Thompson tried to stop me." Emma held up her phone. On the screen, a photograph. An old man in a hospital bed, tubes in his nose, holding a piece of paper. The paper showed radio log entries, faded but legible. "This is Carl Morrison," Emma said. "I found him through his daughter Patricia on Facebook. She sent this an hour ago." Robert stared at the log entry, his own call sign, the correct coordinates in his handwriting. Then, below, in different writing, the transposed numbers. 48 years. 48 years of carrying guilt for another man's mistake. "He wants to come see you," Emma said quietly. "Morrison. He's at Methodist Hospital in Des Moines. His daughter could drive him down tomorrow." Robert couldn't speak. His whole life since Vietnam built on a lie. Margaret dying alone while he sat in the parking lot, missing David's children being born, standing outside Susan's wedding. All of it based on guilt that wasn't even his to carry. "But Tommy still died," Robert whispered. "He's still dead." "Yes," Father Murphy said from the doorway. Nobody had heard him arrive. "But not because of you." Dorothy Kowalski stood behind the priest. Robert recognized her immediately. Same green eyes as Tommy, though lined now with 7 decades of living. She held a small wooden box, the kind Tommy used to carve from ammunition crates during the endless monsoon rains. "Hello, Bobby," she said. "We need to talk about my brother." Dorothy Kowalski moved into the room with the careful steps of someone who'd been driving all night. Her orthopedic shoes made no sound on the linoleum. She set the wooden box on the bedside table, and Robert could see every knife mark where Tommy had carved it from ammunition crate pine during the monsoon season of '71. "I have driven past this hospital 6 times over the years," Dorothy said, pulling up the visitor's chair. "Coming to see my grandchildren in Iowa City. Each time I thought about stopping. Each time I kept driving." She opened the box. Inside, yellowed papers, photographs, a purple heart still in its presentation case. "30 years ago," Dorothy said, "a man came to my apartment in Chicago, Carl Morrison. He was drunk, crying on my doorstep at 2 in the morning, said he needed to confess before he drank himself to death." Robert's throat constricted. The heart monitor tracked his racing pulse. "He told me about the coordinates, how he'd transcribed them wrong, how his uncle covered it up." Dorothy's weathered fingers traced the box's edge. "He gave me these, the original radio logs. Kept them all those years like you kept that shrapnel." She pulled out the papers, military forms, faded but legible. Robert's handwriting clear. 773941. Below it, Morrison's transcription. 773914. "You had it right, Bobby. You always had it right." The room seemed to shrink. Robert felt his children pressing closer, their shadows falling across the bed like a jury. "But if I'd double-checked," Robert started. "If I'd made Morrison repeat—" "Stop." Dorothy pulled something else from the box. An envelope, never mailed. Tommy's lefty handwriting across the front. "Read this." Emma took the envelope with steady hands, looked to Robert for permission. He nodded. "December 2nd, 1971, Emma read. "Bobby, if you're reading this, something went sideways and you're probably blaming yourself like you always do. So let me set you straight." Robert's eyes burned. Tommy's voice came through his granddaughter's words, that Chicago accent clear as yesterday. "I switched the patrol roster tonight. You've been up 3 days straight since the ambush at Hill 47. Could barely hold your rifle. I told Lieutenant Morrison you had dysentery, took your shift. You would have been on the east perimeter where the spotting team sets up. Right where the worst rounds are going to hit if things go bad." Emma's voice caught. She cleared her throat, continued. "I got a feeling about tonight. Can't explain it. That weird pressure in the air, like before the ambush last month. So I'm taking your watch, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it, because by the time you read this, I'll already be at the OP." James moved closer to the bed. Susan reached for Robert's hand. Even David stepped away from the window. "If something happens," Emma continued, "know this. I made my choice. Just like you made yours when you carried Martinez 12 clicks with a bullet in your shoulder. Like you made yours when you went back for Carson under fire. We don't leave anyone behind, and that includes you, you stubborn son of a gun." Dorothy pulled out more letters. Dozens of them, all from Tommy to her, all about Robert. "November 15th, she read from one. "Bobby split his last can of peaches with the new kid from Georgia who was crying from homesick. Didn't say nothing about it, just set half the can on the kid's footlocker and walked away." Another. "Bobby stays up with the scared kids during mortar attacks, tells them stories about hardware stores and fishing for bluegill in farm ponds. Makes it sound so normal they forget to be scared." And another. "If I don't make it back, tell everyone Bobby Mitchell was the best sergeant in Vietnam. Tell them he kept us human." Robert's chest felt crushed. The monitor's beeping grew irregular. "There's more," Dorothy said. "The patrol you were supposed to take. Intelligence knew enemy movement was heavy in that sector. Battalion expected contact. Tommy knew that when he took your shift." She leaned forward, those green eyes just like her brother's. "He didn't die because of a mistake with coordinates, Bobby. He died, preventing you from walking into what he thought was certain death. The artillery was just—" She paused, choosing her words. "The artillery was war being war." Robert's hand went to his chest. Something squeezed inside, like a fist around his heart. "Grandpa?" Emma's voice, distant now. The monitor erupted in alarms. Dr. Harrison rushed forward, already calling for cardiology. "He's having an event," Harrison said. "Everyone out, now!" Through the growing haze, Robert saw Dorothy still holding Tommy's letters, tears on her weathered face. "There's one more thing," she said as the nurses pushed her toward the door. "About why Tommy was really on that patrol. The reason he traded shifts." The room exploded in motion, white coats everywhere, the crash cart appearing. But Robert could only see Dorothy's lips moving, saying something about December 2nd, about a decision Tommy had made. The world went gray at the edges. The crash cart rolled in like thunder. Robert's chest felt crushed under invisible weight. Each breath came shallow, like breathing through wet wool. "VTAC on the monitor," somebody called. Dr. Harrison pushed Dorothy back toward the door, gentle but firm. "Everyone out, now." "Dad!" Susan's voice, high and scared. "Get them out," Harrison barked to the nurses. The room cleared except for medical staff. Through the narrowing tunnel of his vision, Robert saw his children through the glass door, James holding Susan, David with his fist pressed against the wall, Emma clutching those letters from Tommy. "Charging to 200, the cardiologist said. Badge read Dr. Reeves, hands steady as he placed the paddles. "Everyone clear." The electricity hit like lightning. Robert's body lifted off the bed, muscles seizing, then dropped back. The monitor's scream continued unchanged. "No capture. Charge to 300. Cold gel on his chest, the paddles again. Another lightning strike that jerked him like a marionette. Robert felt himself separating, floating up toward those water-stained ceiling tiles. Below, his body on the bed, gray-faced, slack-jawed, 70 years old and finally broken all the way open. "He's bleeding." Dr. Harrison pressed gauze against the surgical site. Dark blood seeping through the dressing. The graft may have torn when he seized. "We need OR. He won't survive transport. 360. Clear." The third shock. Robert drifted higher. The hospital room faded, became Firebase Alpha's medical tent. The antiseptic smell turned to sulfur and copper and mud. Tommy sat on the next cot, 19 forever, that Chicago grin perfect despite what the phosphorus had done to him. "Hell of a thing, Bobby," Tommy said, "carrying me around all these years like a rucksack full of rocks. I killed you." "No." Tommy's hand touched Robert's shoulder, solid, real, warm. "Morrison killed me. The war killed me. Exhaustion killed me. Bad luck killed me. But not you. Never you." Margaret appeared beside Tommy. Not the Margaret who died at 72, hollowed out by cancer, but Margaret from 1973, that white eyelet dress from their wedding, baby's breath in her hair. "I sat in that truck for 3 hours, Robert said to her. "While you died, I sat in the parking lot because I couldn't walk through those doors." "I know." No accusation in her voice, just sadness deep as a well. "The children never understood. They thought you didn't care." "I cared too much." "No," Margaret said. "You cared wrong." Behind her, scenes played like old home movies. David's championship game. Robert in his truck in the parking lot, listening on the radio. Susan's wedding. Robert outside the church, watching through the door crack. Grandchildren's births he'd missed. Christmases cut short when someone mentioned hospitals. 48 years, Margaret said. "You chose your guilt over your life." The monitor flatlined. That long, single tone he'd heard in too many field hospitals. Through the observation window, Father Murphy had his rosary out. Dorothy stood behind the family, Tommy's wooden box pressed to her chest. "We're losing him," Dr. Reeves said, starting chest compressions. Robert heard ribs crack under the pressure, more faces in the growing darkness. The boys from Firebase Alpha, Thompson, who'd had the right coordinates all along, Martinez, who Robert had carried 12 clicks, Carson, who'd frozen during the ambush, all of them looking at him with eyes that held no blame. "Let go," Tommy said. "You've punished yourself enough." But Dorothy's words echoed. Something about December 2nd, about a decision Tommy had made. Something more than just switching patrols. No, Robert thought, or maybe said. Not yet. The room came rushing back, the paddles descending again. "One more try," Dr. Reeves said, sweat dripping onto Robert's still chest. 360, clear. The electricity coursed through him. For a moment, nothing. Then a blip on the monitor. Another. Irregular, weak, but there. "I've got rhythm," Reeves said. "Barely, but it's there." Through the fog of medication and trauma, Robert heard Morrison's voice. Not the lieutenant colonel from 1971, but his nephew Carl, dying of cancer in Des Moines. "I need to tell him," Morrison's voice came from Emma's phone, a video she'd been showing someone. About December 2nd, about why Tommy was really supposed to be on leave. Darkness, then sound filtering through like radio static between stations. A young voice reading, steady and clear. "Tell Bobby the mess sergeant burned the rice again. Had everyone laughing so hard Johnson spit coffee through his nose." Emma's voice. Reading Tommy's letters. Robert couldn't open his eyes, couldn't move, but he could hear everything. Bobby gave his last pair of dry socks to the new kid from Arkansas. Didn't say nothing, just left them on his footlocker. Time blurred. Different voice now, James, his courtroom tone gone soft. "If something happens to me, tell everyone Bobby Mitchell saved 9 men's lives at Hill 47. Tell them he went back 3 times under fire." Susan, reading now. "Bobby made us feel human out here. Yesterday he rigged up a shower with poncho liner and jerry cans. First hot water we'd had in 2 weeks. On what felt like the 3rd day, Robert's eyelids cracked open. Slits of light. The breathing tube was gone. His throat felt scraped raw. Emma slept in the chair, letters scattered across her lap. James on the floor, using his suit jacket as a pillow. Susan and David on the small couch, her head on his shoulder. Dorothy sat beside the bed, holding his hand, fingers tracing the lines in his palm like she was reading a map. "There you are," she whispered. The door opened. A woman in dress blues entered, silver eagles on her shoulders, gray hair in a regulation bun. Her nameplate read Hayes. "Mr. Mitchell," she spoke quietly, not waking the others. "I'm Colonel Patricia Hayes, hospital administrator. Your son James requested an investigation into the Firebase Alpha incident through his Pentagon connections." She pulled out a tablet, angled it so Robert could see. Documents, photocopied, with black redaction marks like wounds. "We found something in the declassified archives." She swiped to another document. The original radio logs from December 3rd, not the ones filed with the investigation, the real ones. Robert's eyes struggled to focus. His call sign, his handwriting, 773941. "You called in the correct coordinates," Colonel Hayes said. "The RTO, Specialist Morrison, transcribed them wrong in the relay. His uncle, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, altered the investigation to protect him." Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, shuffling, with the squeak of wheelchair rubber on linoleum. Carl Morrison appeared in the doorway. Robert barely recognized him, skeletal now, skin yellow as old newspaper, oxygen cannula taped to his face. A younger woman pushed his wheelchair. Patricia, his daughter. "Please," Morrison wheezed. "I need to tell him." James stirred, jerked awake. "Dad? Dad, you're awake." The others woke in sequence, Emma reaching for Robert's hand, Susan checking the monitors, David standing, hands fisting. Morrison's skeletal fingers fumbled with an envelope. "My resignation from the California Senate, effective immediately. And this." Another paper. My confession. Every newspaper will have it tomorrow. He looked at Robert with eyes sunk deep in his skull. December 3rd, 1971, 03:17 hours. You called in 773941. I was exhausted, 4 days without sleep, taking Dexedrine to stay alert. I wrote down 773914. The room went silent except for the monitors and Morrison's labored breathing. Thompson tried to correct me. I told him to shut up, said I knew what I heard. Morrison's voice broke. 3 minutes later, our own Willie Pete landed on your position. His daughter steadied him as a coughing fit took him, spots of blood on his handkerchief. My uncle falsified the investigation, Morrison continued. Said it was equipment failure. Made sure you took the psychological burden while he gestured at himself. I became a senator, Armed Services Committee, voting on sending other people's children to war while knowing I'd killed Tommy Kowalski. Dorothy stood up. The room held its breath. You were 19, she said simply. So was Tommy. Yes. Dorothy moved closer to Morrison's wheelchair. My brother was 19. You were 19. Bobby here was 22. Boys, all of you. Boys we sent to war. She knelt beside the wheelchair, eye level with Morrison. I forgive you. Morrison broke. His skeletal shoulders shook. His daughter held him as he sobbed, decades of guilt pouring out in that sterile hospital room. There's more, Morrison gasped when he could speak. About December 2nd. About why Tommy took that patrol. Robert pushed himself up, ignoring the pull of sutures. Tommy had leave approved, Morrison said. 5 days in Bangkok starting December 3rd. He gave it up. Why? Robert's voice came out sandpaper rough. Because Peterson got a Red Cross notification. His father was dying. Tommy traded leave slots so Peterson could go home. Morrison's daughter wheeled him closer to the bed. But that's not all, Morrison said. I processed the paperwork. Tommy didn't just trade. He volunteered to stay behind when we were understaffed. He knew about the intelligence reports, enemy buildup. Everyone knew something big was coming. The old man reached out, his cold fingers finding Robert's hand. He stayed for you, for the squad. He could have been in Bangkok when those rounds fell. Instead, he chose to stay. Robert felt the words like physical blows. Tommy chose to stay, chose to die. Morrison's eyes, clouded with morphine and approaching death, suddenly sharpened. But there's something else. Something I never told anyone, not even my uncle. About the coordinates you called in. October wind scattered red maple leaves across Cedar Falls Cemetery. Robert's cane, aluminum, adjustable, covered in his grandchildren's signatures in permanent marker, found steady purchase on the gravel path. Each step pulled at the surgical scar, but clean pain now. Healing pain. Dorothy walked beside him, her arm linked through his. 3 months of Wednesday dinners had made them family. She carried a thermos of Folger's coffee and a paper bag from Kowalski's Deli in Chicago. Tommy's cousin still made the kielbasa the same way their grandmother had. Margaret's headstone stood beneath the oak they'd planted after their wedding in '73. Simple granite, the way she'd wanted. Robert lowered himself onto the bench David had installed last month, pressure-treated lumber, built to last. Hey, Maggie. Robert set fresh chrysanthemums in the bronze vase. Yellow ones, her favorite. Brought Dorothy again. She's teaching Susan how to make pierogi. Kitchen looks like a flower bomb went off. Dorothy smiled, unpacking the sandwiches. They ate in comfortable silence, watching clouds move across Iowa sky. The coffee steamed in the cool air, bitter and perfect. Went to Morrison's funeral last week, Robert told the headstone. James drove me down to Des Moines. Small service, maybe 30 people. He pulled the folded newspaper from his jacket, Morrison's obituary, brief and sanitized. Nothing about Firebase Alpha, nothing about the 48 years of lies. The man had died 3 days after his confession, pancreatic cancer finishing what guilt had started. His daughter Patricia thanked me for coming, Robert continued. Said I gave her father peace at the end. A car door closed in the parking area. Emma walked toward them, moving careful now at 7 months pregnant. Jake beside her, protective hand at her elbow. "Grandpa," she kissed his cheek. "The VFW meeting starts in an hour." 22 veterans came now, every Thursday evening in the basement of Post 2737. Last week, a kid back from Afghanistan, couldn't be more than 23, had rolled up his sleeve, shown them the scars he'd been hiding. Robert had simply said, "We see you, son. We're here." Tommy would have loved this, Dorothy said, watching Emma's hand rest on her belly. "A baby named after him." "Thomas Robert Mitchell," Emma said. "We'll call him Tom." Robert's throat tightened. His hand went to his thigh where the shrapnel had lived. Dr. Harrison had let him keep the fragments, 2 pieces of American steel, 3 inches of metal that had traveled inside him for 48 years. They sat in a mason jar on his dresser now, next to Tommy's letters. "Time to go, Dad." James appeared with Susan and David. Wednesday tradition now. Dinner at Robert's house after the cemetery visit. The kitchen that had been silent since Margaret died now filled with voices every week. "Give me a minute," Robert said. They understood, moved back toward the cars. Dorothy squeezed his shoulder, followed them. Robert stood alone at Margaret's grave. The October light slanted gold through the oak branches, same angle as the light through their bedroom window all those mornings. He pulled out a folded paper, his last letter to Tommy, written that morning at the kitchen table. "Dear Tommy," he read aloud to the stone, to the sky, to the brother who'd saved him twice. "I'm living now, really living, not just surviving, but living. Emma's baby kicks when she laughs. Dorothy makes your grandmother's kielbasa every Sunday. I reopened the hardware store. David built me a stool so I can sit between customers. Wind moved through the oak. Leaves fell like grace. The VA approved the scholarship in your name. Full ride to Iowa State for children of veterans. First recipient starts this spring, Peterson's granddaughter. Remember Peterson, the one whose father was dying? She wants to be a teacher like Dorothy was." Robert folded the letter, tucked it under the flower vase where wind couldn't take it. "I gave your bronze star to Patricia Morrison for the VA hospital display. Her father and you, side by side now. 2 boys destroyed by one night. Seems right somehow." He touched the headstone, granite rough under his palm. "I stopped carrying you as weight, Tommy. Now I carry you as..." He searched for the word. "Presence. You and Maggie both. Not ghosts, not guilt, just with me." A car horn honked gently. David, pointing at his watch. The new kid at the VFW, Martinez, needed help with his nightmares about Kandahar. Robert stood, cane steady, not the broken bird shuffle he'd perfected over 48 years, that careful walk designed to hide damage. Real steps now, measured but solid. The hardware store came into view as they drove back into town. The sign David had repainted, Mitchell's Hardware, established 1975. Below it, smaller, proud sponsor of the Kowalski-Mitchell Veterans Fund. The parking lot held 6 cars. Pete, behind the counter, waved through the window. Business was good. Not great, but good. Enough. Emma shifted in the passenger seat, winced. "You okay, sweetheart?" "Just Tom being active." She took Robert's weathered hand, placed it on her belly. The baby kicked, strong and insistent. "He's got your stubbornness already." Robert felt the life moving under his palm. New life carrying old names forward. They pulled up to his house, their house now, with Emma and Jake living in the converted basement while they saved for their own place. The porch light was on, warm yellow in the October dusk. Through the window, Robert could see Susan in the kitchen, David setting the table, Dorothy teaching James how to fold pierogi properly. Robert Mitchell stood from the car, cane in one hand, Emma's hand in the other. He walked toward his house, toward his family, toward whatever time remained. Living now. Finally living. The fragments in the jar on his dresser caught the lamplight when he passed, but Robert didn't look back. 6 months later, I watched Robert Mitchell stand before 43 veterans in that VFW basement. No microphone needed, his voice carried strong and clear now. The Kowalski-Mitchell Fund had transformed the space. Comfortable chairs instead of metal folding ones, coffee that actually tasted like coffee. Pictures on the walls, not of battles, but of healing, veterans with their families, their new jobs, their grandchildren. Dorothy sat in the corner, teaching 2 young Afghanistan veterans to make pierogi. Their hands shook less when they kept busy. Emma, due any day now, helped pour coffee. The support group had become something more than meetings. It had become family. Robert's hardware store employed 3 veterans now. Each Wednesday, after cemetery visits, they gathered. Not to forget the war, but to remember they survived it. To remember they deserved to live, really live, with whatever time remained. That's what Tommy would have wanted. That's what they all learned, finally, after all those years of carrying ghosts. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in the dying, it's in the living after. Disclaimer. This story was inspired by accounts of Vietnam War veterans and created solely for entertainment purposes. This work does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are entirely fictional products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.